The 78th floor conference room. 9 people around a table that costs more than most people make in a year. A USB drive sitting in the center of that table. Small. Black. Unremarkable. The man who put it there is not sitting down. He's standing near the wall. He works nights. He cleans these floors. He has never once been invited into this room. Until today. The most powerful man in the building looks at the drive. Then at him. Something crosses his face that has no name in a boardroom. The recording begins to play. 22 minutes. Nobody moves. One man at the table already knows what's on it. He is the only one who is not surprised. He is the only one who is afraid. The man by the wall watches him. 1,400 nights he spent invisible in this building. Tonight they all finally see him. 1,400 nights. That was how long Elijah Webb had been pushing the same cart down the same hallway on the same floor of the same building. 1,400 nights of fluorescent lights humming overhead. 1,400 nights of empty conference rooms and half-drunk coffee cups, and whiteboards full of numbers that meant nothing to him and everything to the people who left them there. He knew every crack in the marble floor of the 76th floor lobby, knew which elevator door stuck slightly on the left, knew that the third bathroom stall from the end had a loose hinge somebody had been meaning to fix since 2022. Nobody fixed it. Nobody ever fixed it, because fixing things was Elijah's job, and Elijah was not the kind of man people thought about when he wasn't standing directly in front of them, which was most of the time, which was, if he was being honest with himself, all of the time. He pushed the cart past the glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall. The big one, the one with the long mahogany table that seated 20, and the leather chairs that probably cost more individually than his monthly rent. The board had met in there that afternoon. He could tell by the mess. 7 coffee cups, 3 water bottles, a yellow legal pad left face down on the table, like whoever owned it had walked out mid-thought, a silk scarf draped over the back of one chair, forgotten. Elijah went in, did what he always did, collected the cups, wiped the table, straightened the chairs, picked up the legal pad and set it neatly at the head of the table in case someone came back for it. Nobody ever came back for anything. He left the scarf where it was. In the elevator on the way back down to the supply room, he stood in the corner and let the cables do their work. There was a photo taped to the inside wall of the cart. Small. Slightly curled at one corner because he'd printed it at the drugstore 3 years ago and never replaced it with a better copy. A woman. Laughing. Looking straight into the camera, like she was laughing at something the photographer had just said, and whatever it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Elijah didn't look at the photo. He knew it by heart. He had started at Hale Tower in January of 2018. Maintenance and facilities, overnight shift 40 hours a week, benefits after 90 days. The hiring manager had been a heavy-set man named Gerald who shook hands too hard and talked too fast and had clearly been running the same 5-minute script for every new hire since 2009. Sign here. Park in Lot C. Don't use the executive elevators after 11. Elijah had signed, parked in Lot C. Never once touched the executive elevators after 11. He was good at following rules he didn't agree with. He'd had practice. What Gerald had not asked about, and what Elijah had not volunteered, was the transcript from Clark Atlanta University sitting in a folder in the top drawer of his dresser at home. 3 years of coursework. Business Administration, GPA of 387. A letter from his academic advisor dated March of 2014 acknowledging his request for a leave of absence due to a family medical emergency. He had never gone back. He had meant to. For a long time, he had genuinely meant to. Then Denise passed, and meaning to go back started to feel like a different man's plan. Some version of him that existed before March of 2014 had made that plan. That version of him had a lot of plans. The version pushing the cart down the 76th floor hallway at 11:15 on a January Tuesday had made peace with most of them. Most of them. The night it happened, the building was nearly empty. A storm had come in from the lake around 9. Not a blizzard. Just the kind of cold, relentless Chicago winter rain that turned to sleet somewhere around 10 degrees and made every surface in the city vaguely hostile. Elijah had checked the weather app during his break. His walk home from the bus stop was 6 blocks. He had packed his good gloves. He was finishing the south corridor when he heard it. Not a crash, not a scream, just a sound that was wrong. A small, sharp sound like something hard hitting a wall. And then silence of a particular quality. The kind that follows a sound that shouldn't have happened. He stopped pushing the cart, listened. The building breathed around him. Vac. The distant hum of servers 2 floors down. The sleet tapping against the windows, nothing else. He went back to mopping, got 3 feet further down the hall, stopped again. Because that was the thing about silence. Sometimes it was just silence, and sometimes it was something else pretending to be silence. And after 20 years of living in apartments with thin walls and working in buildings at night, Elijah Webb had gotten very good at knowing the difference. He left the cart where it was. The door to the stairwell was at the end of the hall, marked with the standard green exit sign. He pushed it open slowly. She was on the landing, not collapsed, not unconscious. Sitting. Deliberately, specifically sitting, with her back against the cinder block wall and her knees bent and her hands flat on the floor on either side of her, like she was steadying herself against something invisible. Her dress was black, fitted, the kind of dress that had probably looked extraordinary 3 hours ago. Her heels were off, both of them, set neatly beside her right knee like she'd taken them off on purpose. Her hair was down, straight and dark, falling past her shoulders, and she was looking at something on the floor in front of her that wasn't there. The phone was beside her left hand, cracked across the entire screen. Not dropped accidentally, cracked. Cracked like it had hit the wall with intention. She looked up, he froze, she didn't. How long have you been standing there? Her voice was even, not shaking, not relieved, just asking. About 4 seconds, Elijah said. She looked at him for a moment, then she looked back at the floor in front of her. Okay, she said. He should have left. He knew that. He was standing in a stairwell at 11:15 at night, looking at a woman he had never spoken to in the 3 years she'd been running the company whose floors he cleaned. And every rational part of his brain was listing the reasons this was not his situation to be in. Not his floor, not his problem, not his world. He knew exactly who she was, Camille Hale. 35 years old. CEO of Hale Capital, since her father Raymond had his stroke 18 months ago and handed the reins to the only person in the building he trusted completely. Elijah had seen her 100 times from a distance. In the lobby, in the elevator, at the end of long conference room tables gesturing at projections while the men around her wrote things down and pretended they'd thought of it first. He had never been in the same room as her. He'd cleaned the rooms she left, and now here she was, sitting on a concrete landing in her stocking feet with a shattered phone and an expression on her face like she was doing math. Very complicated, very important math. And she did not look like a woman who needed to be rescued. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was sitting very still while she figured out what came next. Elijah had seen that look before. He'd worn it himself in a hospital corridor in the spring of 2014. He didn't leave. I'm not going to call security, he said, if that's what you're waiting to hear. She looked up again. This time she actually looked at him. Not through him, the way the people in this building usually looked. Actually at him, like she was deciding something. Why not? Because you broke your own phone. People who need security don't break their own phones. A pause. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, the architectural suggestion of one. That's an interesting piece of logic. It's the only one I've got. She was quiet for a moment. The sleet tapped the small high window above the landing. I need to not be in this building right now, she said. But I can't go out the front. Lobby cameras, he said. And someone watching them. He thought about that. Side entrance on Wabash goes to the service corridor. Connects to the parking structure on the south end. No cameras between the fire door and the structure elevator. She looked at him steadily. You know that off the top of your head. I installed the lighting in that corridor 2 years ago. She stood, smoothly, deliberately, the way she seemed to do everything. She picked up her heels by the straps and held them in one hand. Left the broken phone on the floor. Okay, she said. Show me. He got her out of the building without incident. His car was in the employee lot, 3 blocks over. A 2009 Buick LeSabre with a heat system that worked perfectly and a rear bumper that did not. He had owned it for 9 years. He kept it clean. She got into the passenger seat without being asked and did not comment on the car. He started driving, south on Michigan, then into the grid of the south side, where the streets got quieter and the buildings got lower, and the city started looking less like a skyline and more like a place where people actually lived. She stared out the window, not at anything in particular, just out. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer explanations. That lasted about 6 blocks. Where are we going? She asked. My place, in Bronzeville, unless you have somewhere better. I don't have anywhere right now. Then Bronzeville it is. She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. You're very calm, she said. I work nights, he said. Calm is a job requirement. His building was on a side street off 47th, 4 stories, brick, built in the 1940s. built in the 1940s and maintained with the particular stubbornness of a structure that had decided it wasn't going anywhere regardless of what the neighborhood did around it. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. 2 bedrooms. One that he slept in and one that had boxes in it he kept meaning to unpack. He unlocked the door and turned on the lamp in the living room, the one by the couch that threw warm yellow light across the space, not the overhead. He'd learned a long time ago that overhead lights at midnight were too aggressive. She walked in, looked around, books on the shelf beside the window, organized, not decoration, actually read, with the spines broken in and pages bent at corners. A low coffee table with a chessboard set up mid-game. A record player on the credenza with a stack of albums beside it, and he knew without looking which one was on top because it was always the same one. A framed photograph on the wall above the shelf. She stopped in front of it. Old photo, black and white. A man standing in front of a barber shop, arms crossed, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who knew he was being photographed and had decided to be fully present for it. A sign above the door was visible, 47th Street. The quality of light and the texture of the print dated it easily. "Your grandfather?" she asked. "First week in Chicago," Elijah said. "January of 1961. He drove up from Mississippi with $60 and a phone number for a man he'd never met who had promised him work." She studied the photograph. Did he get it? The work? He got it. Worked in the same factory for 31 years. Retired. Died in this neighborhood 4 blocks from where we're standing at the age of 82. She turned to look at him. "And you grew up here?" "I grew up here." She nodded slowly, like that answered something she hadn't quite formulated into a question yet. Then she sat down on the couch, not tentatively, not like a guest being polite, like someone who had decided this was where she was going to be for a while and was committing to it fully. "Okay," she said. "Tell me something true." He made coffee, because that was what you did at midnight when 2 people needed to talk, and the world outside was doing something inhospitable with the temperature. He made coffee, and he sat down in the chair across from her, and he let the silence settle between them until it was comfortable enough to speak into. She started. Darius Cole, her COO, 44 years old, 11 years at Hale Capital, the last 4 of which he had spent building something on the side that had nothing to do with the company, and everything to do with controlling it. When Raymond Hale had his stroke 18 months ago, Darius had started moving. Slowly at first, small adjustments, procedural things. The kinds of changes that looked like efficiency and felt like erosion. She had noticed, she had documented, she had said nothing. Because in the world Camille operated in, the first person to show their hand lost. But Darius had gotten impatient. That was the problem with patient men who stopped being patient. They overreached. Tonight he had called her into a private meeting at 9 in the evening, with 3 documents waiting on the table, and a legal team on standby, and the clear expectation that she was going to sign over temporary voting rights, while her father was still recovering and not ask too many questions. She hadn't signed. He had not reacted well to that. "My phone," she said, had a location-sharing app that 3 people in that building had access to. When I broke it, I wasn't being dramatic. I was being specific. Elijah turned his coffee cup in his hands. "And the scarf in the conference room?" She looked at him. "What scarf?" "There was a silk scarf on the chair by the window. I left it because I thought someone forgot it." A pause. "That was mine," she said. "I left it there on purpose. So if anyone checked the cameras and wondered why I was on that floor, there was a reason." He thought about that. She had left a decoy. While being pressured, she had thought clearly enough to leave a decoy. He found, genuinely, that he had no adequate response to that, so he just nodded and drank his coffee. "You don't seem surprised," she said. "I work in buildings full of people playing chess," he said. "I've seen a lot of moves. You just usually see them from the other side of the glass." "Usually," he said. "Yeah." Something in the air shifted, not uncomfortably, just honestly. "Tell me something true," she said again. And this time it was a real request. He looked at the coffee in his hands. "I was at Clark Atlanta," he said. "Business administration. 3rd year. GPA of 387. He paused. "I left in 2014. My wife got sick and then she didn't get better, and I never went back." Silence. "I don't tell people in that building," he said, "because I know what happens when I do. They look at me the same way they looked at me before, but now there's something else in it. Like pity that's trying to look like respect, and I'd rather just be the man with the cart." Camille was quiet for a long moment. "Or," she said slowly, "maybe they'd finally see you." He looked at her. She looked back. "That's not always a good thing," he said. "No," she agreed, "but it's a real one." Evelyn Carter knocked at 6 in the morning. Not because she'd heard anything alarming. Because Evelyn Carter had lived in this building for 22 years, and she had a sixth sense about Elijah Webb's apartment that she had never fully explained and he had never fully questioned. She just knew. When something was different, she knew. She was 66 years old, and she wore the same housecoat to answer her door that she'd been wearing since approximately 2008, and she had never once been anything other than completely herself in the time Elijah had known her. She had been his downstairs neighbor before she'd been his upstairs neighbor. She had brought food to his door 3 times a week for 6 months after Denise passed, and never made him talk about it. She was, in the plainest terms, the closest thing to family that Elijah had in the city. He opened the door, and she was standing there with a plate covered in a dish towel, and an expression on her face that was doing its absolute best to be neutral. "Brought biscuits," she said. "Evelyn. Made extra." She was already looking past him into the apartment, not obviously, just the way Evelyn looked at things she was pretending not to notice. "Storm last night was something. Wanted to make sure you got home okay. I'm standing in the doorway, so you are." She's held out the plate. "These need to be eaten warm." He stepped back. She came in. Camille was on the couch. She'd draped one of the blankets from the hall closet over her legs. Her heels were on the floor beside the coffee table. Her hair was slightly less composed than it had been at midnight. She looked up when Evelyn came in. Evelyn looked at her, then at Elijah, then at her. Nobody said anything for approximately 4 seconds. Evelyn walked to the coffee table and set the plate down. "You want coffee?" she asked Camille, completely normally, as if she had been expecting to find a CEO in her neighbor's apartment at 6 in the morning, and the only variable had been whether there would be enough coffee. Camille blinked once. "Yes," she said. "Thank you. Cream's in the fridge," Evelyn said to Elijah, and sat down in the armchair like she'd been invited. They ate biscuits. Evelyn didn't ask what had happened. Evelyn never asked what had happened. She operated on the principle that people told you what you needed to know when they needed to tell it, and pressing the process served nobody. This was, in Elijah's experience, an extraordinarily rare quality in a human being. After a while, Camille told her. "Not all of it. The shape of it. Enough." Evelyn listened with a particular quality of attention that made you feel like what you were saying was the most important thing that had been said in that room all year. She had always had that quality. Elijah had never figured out whether she'd learned it or been born with it. When Camille finished, Evelyn picked up her coffee cup. "You got people you can trust?" she asked. "I thought I did," Camille said. "I'm revising that list." "Good. Short lists are more reliable than long ones." Evelyn set down her cup. "And your father? Recovering. He doesn't know what's been happening." A pause. "He can't, not yet. If Darius finds out my father knows, he'll accelerate. He'll do something worse before my father can do anything about it." Evelyn nodded slowly, like she was filing this information somewhere organized and useful. "You need anything," she said to Elijah. Standing. "You knock." "Evelyn, I mean it." She looked at him steadily. "You knock." She took her dish towel and left. They listened to her door close down the hall. "She knows something," Camille said. "She always knows something," Elijah said. "She just doesn't always say what." Camille looked at the door, then back at him. "You trust her? With everything?" She considered that, nodded. "That's a very short list," she said. "One person," he said. "It's a very short list." She was quiet for a moment, then very quietly, "Make it 2. He drove her back to the city at 8. The storm had passed. The streets were gray and wet, and the sky was doing that flat Chicago winter thing where it was light but not bright. Like the sun had shown up to work but wasn't putting in the effort. He took the surface streets, slower than the highway. Neither of them pointed that out. At a light on Michigan Avenue, she said, "They're going to find out I was gone. Probably. They're going to trace it back to you. Probably. When they do," she said carefully, "they're going to make things difficult." He watched the light. "I know, Elijah." She said his name like she'd been thinking about whether to use it. "You understand what I'm saying. These are not people who operate with restraint when they feel threatened. I understand what you're saying. And you're not concerned." He glanced over at her. She was watching him with that same expression she'd had on the stairwell landing, like she was doing math, like she was solving something. "I've had hard things happen," he said. "I'm still here." The light changed. He drove. She didn't say anything else until they reached her building. He pulled to the curb. She sat for a moment, hands in her lap, not moving. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Do what?" "Owe someone something with nothing to offer in return." He thought about that. "You don't owe me anything. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" He looked at her. "It works like a person needed help and another person helped them. That's the whole thing. That's all it is." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the door and got out, stood on the sidewalk, looked back through the window. "Thank you," she said. "Go inside," he said. "It's cold." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, that same architectural suggestion. She went inside. He sat at the curb for a moment longer than necessary. Then he drove home to Bronzeville, to the apartment where his grandfather's photo hung above the bookshelf, and the record player needed a new needle, and the boxes in the second bedroom still hadn't unpacked themselves. He made fresh coffee. He sat in the chair by the window. He looked at the chessboard on the coffee table. Someone had moved a piece while he wasn't watching. He studied the board for a long time. Then he moved his own piece. Not because he knew how the game was going to end, but because he had learned, from a very long time of paying attention to things nobody thought he was watching, that the only way to find out was to stay in it. Stay in the room. Stay at the board. Stay. That was the thing about being the man with the cart. You saw everything. Because when nobody looked at you, you could look at everything else. You could watch who sat where at the long mahogany table, who poured whose coffee, who left their documents face down and who left them face up, who was careful, who was careless, who was afraid, and who had decided a long time ago not to be. He had watched this building for 1,400 nights. He thought, now, that the building might have been watching him back. He finished his coffee. Outside, the city went about its morning. Buses, horns, the particular rhythm of Chicago coming awake after a difficult night. The way Chicago always came awake after difficult nights. Without apology, without ceremony. Just present, just still there, still standing. Elijah Webb looked at the photo on the wall. His grandfather, January 1961. $60 and a phone number for a man he'd never met. He had stayed too. That was apparently a family trait. 3 days passed, nothing happened. Which was, Elijah knew, not the same as nothing happening. He went back to work on Wednesday. Different building, mid-rise on the north end of the Loop. A contract his company picked up 2 years ago. Smaller than Hale Tower, fewer floors, fewer people who walked past him like he was furniture. He cleaned, he maintained, he went home. Thursday, same. Friday he got the call, not from Hale Tower directly. From his supervisor, a man named Bernard, who had the permanent expression of someone bracing for bad news. Bernard called at 2 in the afternoon, which was unusual because Elijah was supposed to be sleeping. Night shift workers had an unspoken agreement with the daylight hours. You left them alone. They left you alone. Bernard did not leave him alone. Contract restructuring, Bernard said. The words came out rehearsed, too smooth, like he'd practiced them in his car before dialing. Hale Tower's moving to a consolidated facilities model. The overnight maintenance contract is being absorbed in-house. Elijah sat on the edge of his bed. When? End of the month. That's 11 days, I know. Bernard paused. Elijah, I want you to know this isn't a performance issue. Your record is clean. If you want, I can put you on the roster for the Wacker building or the building on LaSalle, but those are day shifts and the pay differential is... I'll figure it out, Elijah said. He hung up. He sat there for a moment, just sat. Then he got up, went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and stood at the window, looking out at 47th Street while the water heated. The street below was doing its ordinary Friday afternoon things. A woman walking a dog. 2 men talking outside the barber shop on the corner. A delivery truck blocking the right lane while the driver pretended not to notice the horn situation developing behind him. Ordinary. Completely ordinary. The kettle started to whistle. He poured the water. He thought about Camille standing on the sidewalk outside her building, looking back at him through the passenger window. The way she'd said thank you like it cost her something. Like she wasn't used to saying it and meant it anyway. He had not called her. She had not called him. Because she didn't have his number. Because they had not exchanged numbers. Because the entire interaction had operated outside the normal architecture of how 2 people in their respective positions were supposed to interact. And adding phone numbers to that would have made it feel like something it wasn't ready to be named yet. So, no calls. Just a job, disappearing 11 days earlier than it should have. He drank his tea. He made a mental note. Saturday brought the letter. It was slipped under his door sometime before dawn because when he got up at 7, it was there on the floor just inside the threshold. White envelope. No return address. The name of a real estate development company printed in small block letters in the upper left corner. He had never heard of the company. Inside was a 1-page letter addressed to his landlord. His landlord's name was Reginald Booker. And Reginald had owned this building for 30 years and lived on the first floor and fixed things himself when they broke. because he said paying someone else to fix his own property was philosophically incoherent. Someone had sent the letter to the building address and it had ended up under Elijah's door, either by mistake or not. The letter expressed interest in acquiring the property, offered a number, a good number, a number that would have been very interesting to a man in his mid-60s who had been maintaining a 4-story brick building on a teacher's retirement income for 3 decades. Elijah read it twice, then he folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, and went downstairs. Reginald Booker was in the small office off the lobby, which was less an office and more a room where Reginald kept his files and a television and a Mr. Coffee that he had been using since George W. Bush was in office. He looked up when Elijah knocked. "Got something for you," Elijah said and held out the letter. Reginald read it. His expression did not change. He was a man whose face had made peace with a lot of things over 67 years and had stopped reacting to most of them. "This come to you?" he asked. "Under my door." Reginald looked at the letter again. "I've had 3 calls in the last 2 weeks from different companies asking about the building. All different names. All the same conversation, and?" Reginald looked at him over the top of the paper. "And my grandfather built this building, my father maintained it. I am not selling it to a company whose address is a post office box." Elijah nodded. "Good, Elijah. You want to tell me what's going on?" "Not yet. But something is. Something is." He paused at the door. "Don't sign anything until you talk to me first. Doesn't matter who calls or what they offer." Reginald studied him. "This about that business with Hale Tower I saw on the news?" Elijah looked at him. "I watched the morning news," Reginald said, completely without apology. "They mentioned something about the CEO, and then I thought about you working there, and then I thought about these calls." He shrugged. "I'm old. I'm not slow. I know you're not." Reginald picked up his coffee cup. "Go talk to Evelyn." "Why?" "Because she's been waiting for you to come down here, and she's not going to come up there." He nodded toward the window. "She's been sweeping her stoop for 45 minutes. No leaves down there." "Trust me." Evelyn was in fact sweeping a stoop that did not require sweeping. She looked up when he pushed through the building's front door. She did not look surprised. She did not look like a woman who had been waiting. She looked exactly like a woman who had been casually sweeping and had just happened to notice him. The performance was impeccable. He sat on the step beside her. She kept sweeping. "Job's gone," he said. "I heard. You heard. Bernard called Reginald. Reginald told me. We've all been neighbors a long time, Elijah. Information moves." He put his elbows on his knees. "They're putting pressure on the building, too. Real estate inquiries. Multiple companies. All the same conversation." Evelyn was quiet. "And?" she said. "What do you mean, and?" "I mean there's more." He looked at her. "How do you know there's more?" "Because you have your thinking face on. You only have one face, but when you're thinking it does something specific." She stopped sweeping. "What else?" He told her about Camille. Not the whole night, the shape of it, the stairwell, the drive, the conversation. Darius Cole. Evelyn listened. She held the broom in both hands and looked at the street and listened without interrupting, which was one of approximately 4 things on earth that Evelyn Carter did perfectly. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. "She's in danger," Evelyn said. "Not the kind that leaves marks, that's the worst kind." She looked at him. "And you haven't called her?" "I don't have her number." "Elijah." "I don't." She looked at him with the expression she reserved for statements that were technically true and completely beside the point. "She'll reach out when she's ready," he said. "If I go looking, I make her situation more complicated. Right now, the smartest thing I can do is hold still." Evelyn considered this. "Hold still," she repeated. "Hold still." She looked at the street again. A long pause. "Your grandfather," she said, "held still for 31 years on the factory floor. Nobody saw him either." She picked up the broom. "Holding still is not the same as being invisible. You understand the difference?" He looked at her. "I'm learning," he said. She went inside. He sat on the stoop alone for a few more minutes. The street did its Saturday things around him. He thought about his grandfather in the photograph. Arms crossed, looking straight into the camera. Fully present, he stood up, went inside, made a decision. The thing about pressure is that it reveals material. Coal under pressure, diamond. Iron under heat, steel. The same principle applied to human beings, which was something Elijah had not understood in his 20s and had understood very clearly since. Pressure didn't change what you were, it clarified it. Burned off everything that wasn't load-bearing. Left only the structure. He had been under pressure before. 2014. The kind that came in the form of a diagnosis and a timeline and a stack of medical bills that rearranged every plan he had ever made about his own life. The kind of pressure that had no drama to it. No villain. Just physics. Just the weight of a thing that was happening regardless of whether you were ready. He had not broken. He had not become someone different. He had just become more exactly himself. More distilled. More certain of the things that mattered and less interested in everything else. So when the contract ended and the real estate letters appeared and his landlord started getting phone calls, Elijah Webb did not panic. He did not reach out to Camille and ask her to make it stop. He did not look for the exit. He went to church. Greater Hope Baptist was on 48th Street. 12-minute walk from his apartment. He had been going since before Denise passed. Since she was still well enough to sing in the choir. Third pew from the front left side because that was where the acoustics hit right, and Denise had said once that God deserved good acoustics. He went on Sunday morning. He sat in the third pew, left side. The choir sang. He listened. He didn't close his eyes the way some people did. He kept them open, looked at the cross above the altar, at the light coming through the side windows, that flat winter Chicago light that had stopped apologizing for itself around November and would not resume until April. He wasn't praying exactly. He was thinking in the vicinity of prayer. He thought about Denise. Not the way he usually thought about her. With the low-grade grief that had become so familiar it was almost background noise. He thought about her specifically, the particular way she tilted her head when she was listening to something she thought was wrong. The way she left coffee mugs on every surface in the apartment because she'd pour a cup and then forget about it and pour another. The way she'd said, once, in the last year, when things were hard and getting harder, and the math of their situation was not working in their favor by any calculation, the ones who walk past are the ones who taught themselves not to see. She hadn't been talking about him. She'd been talking about a neighbor. Someone who had looked away when she needed help getting groceries up the stairs. Someone who had made a calculation about whether her situation was their problem, and come up with no. But he had carried the sentence with him. He carried it now. He stood when the service ended, shook the reverend's hand, walked home through cold that had developed an opinion about things. He knew what he was going to do. He was going to hold still and not break. That was it. That was the whole plan. Simple, unremarkable, not dramatic enough for anyone to make a story out of. And yet, Tuesday came with another development. He was in the laundry room in the basement of the building when Evelyn appeared in the doorway with her basket, and an expression that indicated she had information she had been sitting on since at least the previous evening. He waited. She sorted laundry. She took her time. Andre called me, she said, eventually. He looked at her, Andre, her assistant, Camille Hale's assistant, Andre Williams. She kept sorting. He called Reginald first, and Reginald told him to call me, because Reginald is sensible. Why is her assistant calling anyone in this building? Because, Evelyn said, would you treat them with kindness? With the deliberate patience of someone to a person who should already understand. He needed to talk to someone connected to you without creating a record of contacting you directly. She paused. He's been with her 6 years. He's frightened. Elijah stopped what he was doing. Frightened of what? Of what he did. He looked at her. Evelyn folded a towel with the precision of someone who had been folding towels for 60 years and had opinions about it. The night everything happened. The night you found her in the stairwell. Someone told Darius Cole that she was staying late. Someone with access to her schedule. Someone who knew her movements. The room was quiet except for the machines. Andre, Elijah said. Andre, Evelyn confirmed. He didn't do it for money. He did it because Darius had something on him. Something personal. Something Andre was not ready to have known. She set down the towel. He said he panicked. He said he didn't know how far Darius was going to take it. He said when she left without signing and the phone went dark and nobody could find her. He sat in his car in the parking garage for 2 hours trying to decide whether he was a coward or just a man who'd made one very bad decision. What did he decide? He decided those might be the same thing. Silence. He wants to fix it, Evelyn said. He doesn't know how to tell her. He's scared that telling her destroys everything. 6 years. He's scared that not telling her destroys everything too. Elijah leaned against the washing machine. Thought about that. A man who loved his job, who trusted someone he shouldn't have trusted, who made a call in the wrong direction when the pressure came down. Not cruel, not mercenary, just scared. The most human thing there was. He needs to tell her himself, Elijah said. Yes, not through us. Agreed. Can you reach back to him? Evelyn picked up another towel. Already did. She paused. I told him she was stronger than he was giving her credit for. I told him that people who are worth working for are generally the ones who can hear hard things. She folded. I told him she had a very short list of people she trusted right now, and that making himself absent from that list entirely was worse than asking to be put back on it. Elijah looked at her. What? She said. When exactly did you become the person managing this situation? She gave him a look of pure, serene dignity. I've been managing situations in this neighborhood for 40 years, she said. You're just now noticing because it's your situation. She picked up her basket. Your laundry's almost done. Don't leave it in the machine again. She went upstairs. He stood in the laundry room and had the very specific thought that Evelyn Carter was either the most quietly extraordinary person he had ever known, or this situation was significantly more organized than he'd realized. Possibly both. Wednesday. Raymond Hale's people called at 10 in the morning. The man on the phone identified himself as a senior advisor to Raymond Hale, personal office, and could Mr. Webb please be available for a meeting Thursday at 2 in the afternoon at the Hale Capital offices? Not a question. The way it was phrased, with the polite inflection of a request layered over the solid infrastructure of an expectation. Elijah said yes. He hung up and stood in the kitchen in his pajamas, at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday, thinking about what he was walking into. A man who had built a billion-dollar company from one manufacturing plant. A man who had survived 40 years of boardrooms and recessions and market corrections and a stroke. A man whose first response to discovering his daughter had spent a night in a stranger's apartment was to have that stranger investigated. He was not under any illusions about what Thursday was. It was an interview. He was going to be evaluated, assessed, measured against a standard he didn't know in advance and couldn't prepare for, because the measurement was not of his skills or his record or his intentions. It was of his character. And character, in Elijah's experience, was something you either had or you didn't, and the having or not having of it didn't change based on who was looking. He was not afraid. He was aware. There was a difference. He ironed his good shirt, the charcoal one, the one he wore for interviews and funerals and occasions where the clothes were expected to do some of the talking. He checked that his shoes were clean. He ate a decent meal. He went to bed at a reasonable hour. He thought before he went to sleep about Camille. Not romantically, not exactly. Just the thought of her, the way she'd said make it too. The way she'd sat on his couch with the blanket over her legs and eaten biscuits and listened to Evelyn like Evelyn was someone worth listening to, which most people in Camille Hale's position would not have had the awareness or the grace to understand. She was managing something enormous, alone. And she was doing it with a precision and a composure that he recognized because it was the same thing he had done in 2014, when the enormous thing had arrived and there was no map for it, and you just had to decide, daily, sometimes hourly, to stay in it. He hoped she was sleeping. He went to sleep. Thursday. The Hale Capital offices occupied floors 70 through 78 of Hale Tower. He had cleaned those floors for 3 years. He knew exactly where the bathrooms were, where the emergency exits were, which conference rooms had the best light, and which ones were deliberately kept dim, because dim rooms made people feel like they were in a more intimate conversation than they were. He went up the public elevator this time. Raymond Hale's personal office was on the 75th floor, corner, 2 exposures, south and west, which meant on a clear day you could see the lake and the skyline simultaneously, and there was a quality to that view that communicated something specific about the man who had chosen to sit inside it every day for 20 years. The room was full of the evidence of a life built, not decorated, built. There were photographs, but not the kind that were selected for visitors. Real photographs, messy ones. A man shaking hands with the mayor at a groundbreaking slightly out of focus. A woman holding a baby. The photo taken at an angle that suggested whoever took it was trying to capture something quick before it passed. A framed drawing in crayon that had been done by a child at some point in the last 30 years, and had been considered worth framing, which said something about the man who framed it. Raymond Hale was behind the desk. He was smaller than Elijah had expected. Not physically diminished, just human-sized, which was different from the impression a name like Raymond Hale created. He was 68, and he looked like 68 in the way that happened when you'd worked hard your whole life and the work showed. Silver at the temples. Lines around the eyes that came from decades of reading fine print. A stillness about him that was either the remnant of the stroke or the natural posture of a man who had won enough battles to stop performing aggression. He looked at Elijah. Elijah looked at him. "Sit down," Raymond said. Elijah sat. Raymond opened a folder on his desk. He did not look at it right away. He looked at Elijah. "I'm going to tell you what I know," he said. and then I'm going to ask you one question. And your answer is going to tell me what I need to know. He paused. That's the whole meeting. All right, Elijah said. You found my daughter in distress in this building. You removed her from the building without notifying security, without contacting anyone on her team, without attempting to verify who she was or what her situation was. You took her to your home. You kept her there until morning. You drove her back and you refused any form of compensation. Raymond's voice was even. Not hostile, not warm. Just precise, that's what I know. Elijah waited. Here's what I found when I looked into you. Raymond opened the folder. He did not read from it. He'd already read it. He was just acknowledging it existed. 11 years at 2 maintenance companies, clean record. No incidents, no complaints. You know this building's systems better than half the people on the facilities management payroll. A pause. Clark Atlanta University, Business Administration, 2011 to 2014. You left in the spring of 2014. Another pause, medical leave, family emergency. The room was quiet. Raymond looked at him. Your wife? Yes. How long? 8 months from diagnosis to the end. Raymond nodded, once, slowly. Like that information landed somewhere specific. I've been trying for 2 weeks to find a reason not to trust you, Raymond said. I couldn't find one. He closed the folder. The one question I said I was going to ask. Elijah waited. What do you want from this situation? Nothing theatrical in the asking. Just a direct question from a man who had built his entire life on knowing the difference between what people said they wanted and what they actually wanted. Elijah thought about it. Not because he didn't know the answer, because the answer deserved to be said correctly. I want to go back to work, he said. I want Reginald Booker's building left alone, and I want your daughter to be able to run the company she's earned, without someone in her own organization trying to take it from her while she's not looking. Raymond said nothing. That's it, Elijah said. That's everything I want. The silence in the room was of a particular quality, the kind that follows something true. Raymond leaned back in his chair. He looked out the south window, at the lake, flat and gray and large in the way the lake always was in January, like it was reminding the city who had been there first. Someone who stayed, Raymond said quietly. Like he was saying it to the window, Elijah looked at him. Raymond turned back. That's what you are, isn't it? I don't know what I am, Elijah said. I just know what I do. Raymond studied him for a long moment. Then he did something Elijah had not anticipated in any of the scenarios he'd run in his head on the drive over. He said, I owe you an apology. Elijah went very still. The contract, Raymond said. The real estate calls on your building. Those weren't my orders. I instructed my team to investigate you. I did not instruct anyone to destabilize your life. He paused. Someone took initiative. Someone decided that removing your stability was a faster route to the same conclusion. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That is not how I operate, and I dealt with it. Elijah processed this. Who? Not Darius, Raymond said. Someone who wanted to appear useful to the right people. He's no longer with the company. A pause. Your contract will be reinstated by Monday. The calls to your building will stop. Elijah said nothing for a moment. I'm not telling you this to even the score, Raymond said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the source of what was coming at you, and because a man who has been treated unfairly deserves to have it acknowledged directly. Acknowledged, Elijah said. Not apologized for. Raymond looked at him. You said you owed me an apology, Elijah said, and then you explained what happened. Those aren't the same thing. The room was very quiet. Then Raymond Hale did something that Elijah suspected he did rarely, and with great deliberateness. He said, I'm sorry. 2 words, no elaboration, just the thing itself. Elijah nodded, accepted it, did not make it larger than it was. Thank you. Raymond looked at the folder on his desk. There's something else. All right. Darius is moving. I've been watching him for months. I know more than he thinks I know, but I need something I don't currently have. He looked up. Evidence, admissible, clear. The kind that ends this in a boardroom and not a courtroom. He paused. My daughter told me she trusts you. She did not say why. She did not need to. He held Elijah's gaze. Is there anything you know about that building that would help us? Elijah thought about the maintenance systems, about the work orders, about the audio monitoring equipment he'd installed in 2021 to track mechanical noise levels on the upper floors, about the log that ran continuously, about the fact that no one had ever asked him about any of it because no one in this building had ever thought about what the man with the cart might know. He thought about Denise. The ones who walk past are the ones who taught themselves not to see. He was not walking past, I might, he said. Raymond leaned forward. Tell me, he said. That night, Elijah came home to find a small paper bag hanging from his door handle. Inside, one container of Evelyn's sweet potato pie. Still warm, which meant she had timed it deliberately, which was not surprising. Underneath the container was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it, in Evelyn's handwriting, which was the particular handwriting of a woman who had spent decades taking notes that mattered and had developed an opinion about legibility. She called Andre, he told her. She listened to the whole thing before she said a word. Then she said, I know. She already knew. She just needed him to say it. Below that, a second line. Short list. Still two. He folded the paper, put it in his jacket pocket. He took the sweet potato pie inside. He sat at the kitchen table and ate it in the quiet of his apartment, and looked at the chessboard on the coffee table, and thought about the piece that had moved. He moved his. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did in January. Enduring, pushing through, not asking anyone for permission to still be standing when spring finally arrived. He went to bed. He slept without interruption for the first time in a week. Something had shifted. Not resolved. Not finished. But shifted the way weight shifted when you'd been carrying something alone for a long time, and someone finally put their hand under the other end. You were still carrying it. It was still heavy. But you were not carrying it alone anymore. And that was different. That was everything. The leak happened on a Friday. Of course it did. Friday was when things like this happened. When the week had already done its damage and the weekend was close enough to smell, but far enough away to make you feel the distance. Friday at 4:17 in the afternoon. Because Elijah had looked at his phone when the first alert came through. And the time had burned itself into his memory the way times did when they were attached to things you couldn't take back. A photograph. Him and Camille. Taken from a distance slightly grainy, the kind of image that came from a phone camera pushed past what it was built for. The parking structure on Wabash, the night of the storm. She was looking back at him over her shoulder. He was saying something. Neither of them knew they were being photographed. Nobody had been in that structure that night. He had checked. Except someone had been. The caption read, Hail Capital CEO's hidden connection to building maintenance worker. Sources say the relationship began months before recent corporate tensions. Relationship. That word doing tremendous work it had not been asked to do. By 5 o'clock the image was on 4 different business news sites. By 6 it had moved into the general news cycle. By 7 Elijah's phone had received 11 calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He declined all of them. Turned the volume off. Sat in his kitchen and read the coverage with the attention of a man assessing structural damage. What was still standing? What had already come down? Camille had not called, which meant she was managing something. Something larger than a phone call. He made dinner, ate it, washed the dishes. He did not sleep particularly well but slept enough. In the morning he stood at the window with coffee and watched 47th Street come awake and thought about what came next. What came next, it turned out, was Darius Cole deciding he was out of time. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning, 9 o'clock, 78th floor. Raymond called Sunday evening, brief, direct, no wasted words. He's calling for a vote, Raymond said. Temporary suspension of executive authority. 30 days. He'll frame it as protecting shareholder interests during a period of reputational uncertainty. And the board? Split. 4 of the 9 are his. 3 are mine. 2 are undecided, which means they're scared and they'll go wherever the pressure is greatest. Elijah was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? The audio system. Whatever Darius said in that meeting the night she refused to sign. The logs go back 18 months. Continuous recording. I know exactly where the files are and how to access them. A pause. But if I pull those files without authorization, there are questions about chain of custody. Our legal team already looked at it, Raymond said. The maintenance monitoring system is covered under the building's operational security policy. Every employee signs an acknowledgement of ambient recording for equipment maintenance purposes when they're hired, and again when the policy updates. He paused. Darius signed the original acknowledgement in 2019. He signed the updated policy in 2022. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, opened them. Darius Cole had signed his own name to the paper that would end him. Monday, Raymond said. 9 o'clock, can you be there? He thought about what it meant to walk into that room, not as the man with the cart, as himself. As Elijah Webb, who had cleaned those floors for 3 years and known things nobody had thought to ask him about, and held still when the pressure came down and not broken once. I'll be there, he said. Sunday night he went to Evelyn's door. She opened it before he knocked. He had stopped being surprised by this. She was in her kitchen. Something on the stove that smelled like the beginning of a good decision. She gestured at the chair at her table without asking if he wanted to sit because she already knew he did, and he sat. Tomorrow, he said. I know. I'm going to walk into that board room as the maintenance worker who spent 3 years cleaning rooms he wasn't supposed to have opinions about. And I need to know if that's going to be enough. Evelyn stirred what was on the stove. She took her time. She understood that the question wasn't really about tomorrow. It was about something older than tomorrow. Something that had been sitting in him since 2014 and probably before that. Your grandfather walked into every room in this city for 31 years, she said, with an accent people laughed at and hands that showed what he did for a living. He never stopped walking in. She turned around. Was that enough? He built a life. He built more than that. She went back to stirring. He built the conditions for you to be standing here asking me this question. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Denise would have something to say about all of this, he said. Denise would have said it 3 days ago and made you figure out the rest yourself. Evelyn set down the spoon. She was efficient like that. He laughed, real and unexpected, the kind that surprised you by arriving. Evelyn looked at him with something in her eyes that was too layered to name simply. There's something I should have told you a week ago, she said. He waited. She sat down across from him. She put her hands flat on the table, the way she did when she was about to say something she had organized carefully. I wasn't just a paralegal, she said. I was. 28 years. But the firm was Morrow and Associates. Civil rights litigation, employment discrimination, housing cases, First and 14th Amendment work. She looked at her hands. I retired in 2018, but I know what admissible evidence looks like, and I know what chain of custody means. When you told me about the audio system, I made some calls to a colleague who still practices, just to confirm the legal landscape. Just to make sure that when you walked into that room, whatever you brought was airtight. The kitchen held the information for a moment. Evelyn, don't. I'm going to anyway. Elijah, I did not want you to know I was helping. I wanted you to know you could handle it. Those are not the same thing. She looked at him steadily. Denise's mother was my closest friend for 40 years. You think I was going to bring biscuits and go back upstairs and do nothing? He looked at the table, then at her. Thank you, he said. Go Fwin first, she said. Then thank me. Monday morning came in gray and purposeful. He dressed carefully, the charcoal shirt, dark pants, his good jacket. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment, not with vanity, just making sure the outside matched what was inside, that what people saw when he walked in would be exactly what was there. No more, no less. He walked to the bus stop, took the Red Line north, got off at Lake, walked 3 blocks to Hale Tower in cold that made the city feel like it was asking whether you were serious about being present. He was serious. He went through the lobby, past the security desk where Theodore looked at his screen, then at Elijah, then back at his screen with the expression of a man recalibrating something. You're on the approved list for the 78th floor, Mr. Webb. I know, Elijah said. Theodore handed him a visitor badge, a real one, with his name on it printed in clean black letters, Elijah Webb, visitor. He took the elevator up. The 78th floor conference room was the largest in the building. The one with windows that on clear days showed the lake from one angle and the skyline from another. Today was not a clear day. Chicago in January doing what it did, gray sky pressing low, the lake somewhere behind the mist, present but not visible. There anyway. 9 board members around the long table, Raymond at one end, an empty chair at the other that Darius had not yet taken, and Camille. She was standing near the windows when Elijah came in. Not at the table, not seated. She had positioned herself between the room and the view, which put her in a quality of gray morning light that did something specific to the navy dress she was wearing. Long sleeves, fitted through the shoulders. The kind of dress that said she had thought carefully about this room and these people, and what she needed them to see when they looked at her. Her hair was down, straight and dark against the navy, and she was still in the way she was still when she was watching everything at once. She looked at him when he walked in. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. He took a position near the wall, not at the table, not presenting himself as someone who belonged at the table, because that was not the battle he was here to fight. Darius arrived 2 minutes later. He came in with the energy of a man who had already decided how the morning was going to go. Soot pressed, portfolio under his arm. He scanned the room in the way he always scanned rooms, quickly, cataloging who was where and what it meant. He saw Elijah. Something moved through his expression. Not alarm, calculation. The rapid, invisible calculation of a man who had encountered an element outside his blueprint and was already working to fit it into a framework where it didn't change the outcome. "This is a closed board meeting," Darius said. "Mr. Webb is here as a facilities consultant with direct knowledge relevant to today's discussion," Raymond said. "At my invitation." Facilities consultant. Darius looked at Elijah for a moment longer than was natural. Then he sat down, opened his portfolio, proceeded. He was good. Elijah had known he would be. 11 minutes. Structured, precise. Not one word that was technically untrue. He presented the media coverage as a symptom of a larger pattern. He used the language of fiduciary responsibility and stakeholder confidence and executive stability during periods of uncertainty. He never said Camille had done anything wrong. He arranged facts in a configuration that implied it without requiring him to say it. It was, in its way, impressive. Then he said, "I'm asking this board to invoke the executive suspension clause. 30 days, a structured review period." Silence. Patricia, one of the undecided board members, leaned forward. "What exactly is the conduct concern? What are you alleging happened?" Darius paused, choosing. "I'm not alleging misconduct. I'm suggesting that recent personal decisions have created a reputational environment that affects our ability to—" "Recent personal decisions," Camille said. She said it quietly, not interrupting, just placing the phrase back in the room where everyone could look at it properly. Darius looked at her. "You want to suspend me," she said, "because I was photographed in a parking structure with a man who works in this building." She let that sit for exactly one beat. "That's the conduct concern. The optics of the situation. The optics are of a woman doing her job," she said, "which is what I have been doing for 3 years while my father recovered, and you spent 18 months building a case for a meeting. You assumed I wouldn't be prepared for." The temperature in the room shifted, not dramatically, just a degree or two, enough to feel. Darius smiled, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with warmth. "This isn't personal, Camille." "No," she agreed, "it's business. So let's discuss the business." She looked at Elijah. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out a USB drive, walked to the conference table and set it in the center. He did not make a speech about it. He did not explain what it was or why it mattered or what was on it. He set it down and stepped back. Darius looked at it. His face did something small, very controlled. "Would you treat them with kindness?" The thing that happened when a man who had built a careful structure looked at something that didn't belong in it and could not immediately calculate what it cost him. "That's a recording," Elijah said. "From the environmental monitoring system on the 76th floor. The system that tracks mechanical noise levels in the maintenance infrastructure." He paused. "I installed it in 2021. It runs continuously. Every employee who works in this building signed an acknowledgement of ambient recording for operational purposes." He looked at Darius, "Including you. In 2019, and again in 2022 when the policy was updated." The room was very still. The recording from the evening of January 9th documents a meeting between Mr. Cole and Miss Hale, the full duration, including the specific language used when Miss Lind to sign the documents presented to her. He paused. "Including the language used after she declined." Darius said nothing, which was in its own way the loudest thing in the room. Gerald, the other undecided board member, said, "Can we hear it?" Raymond looked at Camille. Something passed between them that was older than this room. "Yes," Camille said. She plugged in the drive. The recording lasted 22 minutes. Elijah did not listen. He watched the room instead. He watched Patricia's expression change at the 4-minute mark. Watched Gerald set down his pen at the 9-minute mark and not pick it up again. Watched 2 of Darius's 4 reliable supporters begin looking at the table instead of at Darius somewhere around minute 15. Watched one of them take a slow breath and let it out and not look up again after that. And he watched Darius. Because Darius was the most instructive thing in the room. Darius Cole was a smart man, an experienced man, a man who had spent 2 decades learning how power moved and how to stand in its current. And he sat there and listened to his own voice come out of the conference room speakers for 22 minutes, and Elijah watched him understand, gradually, with the specific quality of a very intelligent person working through a calculation they cannot calculate their way out of. The room had moved. The ground was no longer where he had left it. When the recording ended, nobody spoke for a moment. Raymond said, "I'd like to call for a vote on the executive suspension clause." "Seconded," Patricia said, immediately, 8-1. Darius was the one. He left without a scene. That was in some ways the most Darius thing about the entire morning. He stood, straightened his jacket, picked up his portfolio. He did not slam anything or raise his voice or threaten anyone. He walked to the door with the composure of a man who was already planning the next move, even if this particular board was no longer the arena for it. He paused at the door. He turned and looked at Elijah, not with anger, not with the expression of a man compiling a list of grievances to address later. What crossed his face was something Elijah had not expected. Something that was almost in a specific and uncomfortable way honest, the look of a man who had just fully understood what he had underestimated, and was acknowledging it. Once, privately, because he was not the kind of man who could say it out loud but was, apparently, still the kind of man who felt it. Then he walked out. The door closed, the room exhaled. An hour later, the board business concluded. Camille's executive authority was formally reaffirmed. A separate motion passed to open an internal investigation into the prior 18 months of activity. That investigation had a timeline and a mandate and a scope that would keep a number of lawyers very busy through the spring. The board members filed out. Raymond stayed at the table. Camille stayed. Elijah stayed. The three of them in the big room with the gray morning light coming through the windows. The lakes still invisible behind the mist. There anyway. Raymond looked at Elijah for a long moment before he spoke, not composing what he was going to say. He had already composed it. He was sitting with it first, making sure it was honest before he let it out. I built this company in 1987, Raymond said. One acquisition, one team, 37 years of decisions that I believed in. He looked at his hands on the table. I built it on the work of people I never looked at directly. The overnight crews, the maintenance staff, the people who were in the building before the executives arrived and still in it after they left. He did not look away from his hands. I walked past all of them, not cruelly, not deliberately. I never stopped to see them. The room held that sentence. I spent 2 weeks trying to find a reason not to trust you, he said, because trusting you meant acknowledging that the person who helped my daughter when she needed it most was someone I had been walking past for 3 years. He looked up. His jaw was tight. That is not comfortable knowledge. He stopped. And Elijah saw it then. The thing that was costing Raymond Hale something real to do. Not the words themselves. The stopping. The willingness to sit in the discomfort of what he was about to say without reaching for a caveat or a qualification or a pivot to action. Just sitting in it. I'm sorry, Raymond said. 2 words. Nothing attached. The simplest and hardest thing. Elijah looked at him. He believed it. Not because the words were elaborate, because they weren't. Because Raymond Hale had stripped away every professional instinct he had and said the smallest true thing. I hear you, Elijah said, and I accept it. He paused. I also want you to know something, he said. What happened here doesn't just happen here. It happens in every building in this city, every company, every institution. The people who keep the infrastructure running are invisible until something breaks, and sometimes even then. He held Raymond's gaze. What you do with that knowledge now is up to you, but you have it. You can't give it back. Raymond looked at him for a long time. No, he said quietly, I can't. Camille found him in the hall outside the conference room. She walked toward him with the particular directness of a woman who had decided what she wanted to say and was not going to approach it sideways. You didn't have to come, she said. I know. You could have given the files to Raymond and stayed home. I know that too. So why didn't you? He thought about it honestly. Because it mattered that I was in that room, not just the files. Me, the man who installed that system and pulled those files and knows that building from the floor up. He paused. If I'd handed it off, somebody else would have stood there, and the story would have been about the evidence, not about who had it. Another pause, and the who matters. Sometimes the who is the whole point. She looked at him. The man who stayed, she said, not a question, not a title she was assigning him, just saying out loud what she had understood for a while. Yeah, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to do something real with what happened here. Not a program, not a metric. Something that actually changes who gets seen in buildings like this one and companies like this one. She held his gaze. I want your help with that, not as a symbol. As a person who knows what it looks like from the other side of the glass. There's something I want to do first, he said. Tell me. They found a small lounge off the 75th floor. Empty. Nobody around. The city pressing gray against the windows. He told her about Denise. Not the shape of her. The person. Denise Webb, who had grown up 4 blocks from the apartment they'd shared in Bronzeville. Who had sung in the choir at Greater Hope Baptist. Who had studied nursing and come back to the South Side. Because she said the people who needed nurses most were the ones the good hospitals downtown never saw. Who had gotten sick in the winter of 2013. Sicker through 2014. gone by November of that year at 29 years old. Who had made him promise? In October, when she still had the energy for promises, go back to that school. Finish what you started. Don't use me as a reason to stop moving. He had promised, and then he hadn't. Camille listened. She did not look anywhere else, did not prepare what she would say while he was still talking. When he finished, neither of them spoke for a moment. She sounds, Camille said carefully, like someone who saw things without flinching. She saw everything clearly. It was best quality and the thing that made her the most exhausting person to disagree with. The corner of Camille's mouth moved, genuine, specific to this moment and no other. Did you disagree with her oft, constantly? He looked at his hands. She was right most of the time. What did she say about Clark Atlanta? She told me to go back. She made me promise I would. He was quiet. I promised. And then I didn't. Because going back meant accepting she was gone. And for a long time I wasn't ready to accept that. He paused. Knowing and feeling are different systems. It's not too late, Camille said. I know. I mean it genuinely. Not as encouragement. As a fact. I know that too. He looked at her. There's something I want to build. Something that matters more to me than any advisory role or institutional initiative. He paused. There are people who had to leave school because their families needed them. Not because they weren't capable. Because life arrived and the institution wasn't built to accommodate that. He held her gaze. I want Hale Capital to fund a scholarship. HBCU students who had to withdraw for family reasons. No essay about their hardship. No narrative of what they overcame. Just their academic record, their reason for leaving and a path back in. No other conditions. Camille did not hesitate. What do you want to call it? He had thought about this. He had allowed himself to think about it fully only once on Sunday night, because wanting things directly had felt for a long time like a risk he couldn't afford. The Denise Webb Scholarship, he said. Quiet settled in the room. Yes, Camille said. Just that. The way yes sounded when it was the only honest response to something and the person saying it understood exactly what it cost and exactly what it was worth. I'll have the proposal drafted by the end of the week, she said. My father will co-sign. The board will approve it at the next meeting. She looked at him steadily. It will exist. He nodded. And the thing that moved through him in that moment was not triumph. Not the dramatic release of something long held finally letting go. It was quieter than that, more specific. It was the feeling of a promise kept, not the one about going back to school, though that one still lived in him and still waited. This was the other one. The unspoken one. The one that lived inside the sentence Denise had left him like something tucked in a coat pocket, found later when the weather changed. Don't become someone who walks past. He hadn't. He stood up. I'll be in touch about the proposal, Camille said. I know where to find you, he said. She almost laughed. Not quite, but close. He took the elevator down alone. He left the building at 3 in the afternoon and walked instead of going straight to the bus stop. Down Michigan. Past the lobbies he had cleaned and the floors he had polished to a shine nobody noticed, because nobody noticed a thing until it was gone. Past the buildings that held thousands of people who held thousands of lives, that the city did not particularly care about one way or another, which was the thing about Chicago that he had come to understand was not cruelty but a kind of freedom. If it didn't care whether you succeeded, it also didn't care whether you tried. So you tried. And nobody could tell you whether that was the right amount of trying or the right kind. You just did it. And the city went on around you. And you found out what you were made of in the gaps between its indifference. He walked until the cold made a serious argument, and then he found the bus stop and rode south. 47th Street, his stop. He walked the block home, the barbershop on the corner. 2 men outside, talking with the ease of people who had been talking on that corner long enough to have opinions about it. The dry cleaner with the hand-lettered sign. The smell of something frying from the kitchen of the building on the right. He stood outside his building for a moment. Looked up at the 3rd-floor window. His window. The lamp he left on when he went out. The one that threw yellow light into the apartment so it wouldn't be dark when he came home. He went inside. That evening, after dinner, he sat at the kitchen table with the Clark Atlanta University website open on his phone. He had opened it before. Several times over several years. He had read the adult learner read mission page, in the particular way you read something you're not ready to act on. Taking in the information, putting the phone down, coming back. He sat with it now without putting it down. He requested his transcripts. He filled out the read mission application. When he got to the personal statement 200 words, intended return and purpose, he wrote it 4 times. The fourth version was 89 words and said exactly what he meant without anything extra attached to it. He submitted it. He sat back in the chair. He looked at the chessboard on the coffee table, the piece he had moved weeks ago still where he'd left it. He had been playing slowly against himself for longer than he could remember. He got up, looked at the board, made the next move. He looked at the photograph on the wall, his grandfather, 47th Street, 1961, arms crossed, eyes straight into the camera, not posing, just present fully and deliberately there. Elijah nodded at him. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went to bed and slept without interruption. For the first time in longer than he could clearly recall. 3 weeks later, the board approved the scholarship proposal. Unanimous. Raymond signed the founding documents. The announcement went out on a Tuesday. The Denise Webb Scholarship at Hale Capital. Full tuition support for students at historically black colleges and universities who had withdrawn from their programs due to family circumstances. No essay on hardship required. Applicants submitted their academic record, their reason for withdrawal, and a brief statement of their intended return. Nothing else. 14 applications came in by the end of the month. Elijah read everyone. He had no official role in the selection process. That was handled by an independent committee. But Camille had asked him to read them, to tell her if the process was capturing what it was supposed to capture. He sat at the kitchen table with 14 folders. A woman who had left Howard in her junior year to care for her mother after a stroke. A man who had left business school when his father's income disappeared, and someone in the family needed to work immediately. A woman 3 semesters from her degree who had gone home when her brother was hurt, and there was no one else. He read all 14. He thought about Clark Atlanta, about the letter from his academic advisor still in his dresser drawer, about a promise made in October, in a room where the light was different and the world was about to change permanently, and Denise had looked at him and made him say it out loud. He picked up his phone. He had already submitted the application. He already knew his transcripts were on file. He already knew the readmission committee met in February. He put the phone down. He went back to the folders. He wrote notes on each one. Observations, questions the committee might consider, ways the process could be refined so it captured not just the circumstances of what these people had carried and kept carrying and were still carrying when they sat down to fill out the form. He worked for 2 hours. Then he closed the folders and stacked them neatly and sat in the quiet of his kitchen. Evelyn knocked at 8:30. She came in with her coat still on and sat across from him and looked at the folders and then at him. "Well," she said. 14, he said. She looked at the stack. Something moved through her face that started at her eyes and moved slowly outward, and it was not quite crying, but it was everything that lived right beside it. Denise Webb Scholarship, she said. Like she was making the name real by saying it. Yeah, she pressed her lips together, put her hand flat on the table between them. He put his hand over hers. They sat like that for a moment. 2 people on the other side of something that had been worth going through. She would have had opinions about the application process, Evelyn said finally. She would have redesigned the whole thing by Wednesday, he said. Evelyn laughed, real and sudden, the kind that arrived before she could manage it. He laughed too. In the kitchen, where Denise's absence lived alongside everything else, where the lamp by the window threw its yellow light, and the chessboard sat mid-game on the coffee table, and the photograph on the wall held a man standing straight in 1961 outside a barber shop on this exact street, in this exact neighborhood, having arrived from somewhere hard and decided to stay. They laughed together in the warm kitchen and the city went on outside, and that was enough. That was, genuinely, everything. The first year, 14 students received the Denise Webb Scholarship. None of them knew about a stairwell on the 76th floor or a January storm or a drive through sleeping streets to a neighborhood in the South Side. None of them knew about biscuits at 6 in the morning or a woman who had retired from practicing law but had never stopped understanding it. None of them knew about a man who had stood at the end of a hallway one night and almost walked away from something that turned out to be everything. They just knew there was a fund with a woman's name on it that had given them back something they'd thought was gone for good. That was enough to know. The man who made it possible went back to Clark Atlanta the following fall. He would finish what he started, at 40, which was, it turned out, exactly the right time for him, and not a moment too late, and not a moment too early, and precisely when it was supposed to happen, which was the way most real things worked. if you stayed in them long enough to find out. None of those 14 students ever learned his name. He didn't need them to. That was never the point.